He didn't slow down when she said his name. Her braids tightened in his fist as he dragged her backward across the wet parking structure floor. Her heels scraped the concrete. Her bag hit the ground somewhere behind her. A couple walking toward the elevator saw it happen. The man glanced over, the woman pulled his arm, and they kept moving. Nobody stopped. George Reed had both hands in it now, one gripping her hair, one on her wrist, his voice low and even like he was explaining something simple to someone who kept getting it wrong. I've been patient, Mia. You know I've been patient. She got one hand free and raked it across his forearm. He didn't flinch. 8 months. She'd been gone 8 months, and he still moved like he owned whatever room she was in. Then headlights swept across the structure. A car, black, quiet, the kind that costs more than most people's apartments, rolled into the last open space near the east wall. The engine ran for a moment. Then it cut off. The man inside didn't get out right away. He sat there in the dark behind the wheel, watching through the windshield. Still, like someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. George hadn't noticed yet. Mia had. Before we go on, let me ask you something quickly. I've been wondering where people who enjoy stories like this are actually watching from these days. Are you the type watching on your phone in bed, sneaking it on your laptop at work, or sitting comfortably in your living room with your TV? Tell me in the comments, and also tell me where in the world you're watching from. I'm honestly curious. Do people still use tablets for this, or is that phase gone? Now let's go back. 8 months earlier, on a Tuesday night in February, Mia Carter had packed one bag. Not because she was being dramatic, because she'd done the math and one bag was all she could carry if she needed to move fast, and she needed to move fast. She'd found the tracker on her car 3 weeks before that, stuck to the underside of the rear bumper, small enough that she'd only spotted it because she dropped her keys and crouched down to get them, and the light from her phone caught the edge of it. She'd left it there for 2 days while she figured out her next step. Then she pulled it off, put it in an envelope, and mailed it to George's office with no note inside. He called her 17 times that night. She didn't answer. What broke it? The actual thing, the moment she understood what she was living inside, wasn't the tracker. It wasn't the time he'd shown up at her campus office and sat in the hallway outside her door for 2 hours without telling her he was coming. It wasn't even the night things got physical, though that night lived in her body in a way she couldn't fully describe. It was a Sunday morning. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment they shared, working on her research, and she'd looked up and seen him standing in the doorway watching her. Not doing anything, just watching. And when she met his eyes, he smiled, slow and satisfied, and said, "You're not going anywhere." He meant it like a compliment, like a reassurance. That was the moment. She'd started planning the same afternoon. The hard part wasn't leaving. The hard part was that she'd loved him once. Genuinely. The way you love someone when you're 24 and they're 27 and they look at you like you're the answer to a question they've been asking their whole life. George Reed was charming in the specific way that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. The kind of charming that makes you feel chosen, important, seen. It took her a long time to understand that what he actually wanted wasn't her. It was her compliance. The two things had looked identical for long enough that by the time she could tell the difference, she was already deep inside something that was hard to climb out of. She'd climbed out anyway. She'd taken the valet job at Club Obsidian 6 weeks after moving into her new place, a studio in a neighborhood George wouldn't think to look. The job was supposed to be temporary. Then she'd started noticing things, the names on the cars, the patterns in who visited when, the way certain men always arrived together and always paid in cash despite wearing watches worth more than her annual tuition. She'd started taking notes on her phone, then in a dedicated notebook. Then she'd reached out, carefully, to Min Jun, a nervous man in his early 40s who worked in the accounting department of a company she'd traced to Club Obsidian's ownership structure. It had taken her 4 months to get Min Jun to trust her enough to meet in person. Another month after that for him to hand her the drive. 7 months of work. 7 months of being careful, being precise, keeping her head down and her eyes open. She was 3 weeks from having everything she needed to hand it to the right journalist and blow the entire thing open. Then George showed up. Back in the parking structure, the driver's door of the black car opened. The man who stepped out was tall, composed, wearing a dark coat over a suit that fit the way expensive things fit, like it was made for him specifically, which it probably was. He had the kind of face that was hard to read at distance. Not hard because it was blank. Hard because everything on it was controlled in a way that suggested the control was deliberate and practiced. He walked toward them without hurrying. George finally noticed. He turned his head, keeping his grip on Mia's wrist, and looked at the man approaching. His expression shifted, not fear, something closer to irritation. Like someone had knocked on a door he'd locked on purpose. "This is private," George said. The man stopped about 6 feet away, looked at George, then at Mia, then back at George, and the look he gave him was the specific look of someone who has assessed a situation completely and found it beneath them. "Let her go." His voice was even, not loud. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it's already decided how this ends. George almost laughed. Walk away, man. You don't know what you're getting into. The man put his hands in his coat pockets and waited. George pulled Mia closer by the wrist, reasserting something, and that was when the man took one step forward and said the same two words again, except this time there was nothing underneath them but absolute certainty. Let her go. Something in the air changed. George released her wrist. Not because he was afraid, or at least that's what his face was working hard to communicate. He released her because the calculation shifted. He stepped back, straightened his jacket, and looked at Mia with an expression that had too much patience in it, the kind that's actually a threat wearing different clothes. We're not done, he said. To her, not to the man in the coat. Then he walked back to his car, got in, sat there for a moment before the engine turned over and the taillights disappeared up the ramp. Mia stood in the space he'd left. Her left wrist had a mark on it. Her braids were half pulled out of the style she'd spent 40 minutes on that morning. She bent down and picked up her bag from where it had landed. The man in the coat was still standing there. You work here, he said. It wasn't a question. My shift ended. I know. He reached into his interior coat pocket and produced something. A small card, plain white, no logo. He held it out. My car is level 3, East Row. I need it in 20 minutes. She looked at the card. Looked at him. I'm off the clock. I know that too. He didn't lower the card. 20 minutes. She took it. He walked toward the elevator without looking back. Mia stood in the empty structure holding the card, her bag on her shoulder, the flash drive pressing against her ribs through the fabric of her shirt. She looked at the card. Jae-won Han. She knew that name. If this story has you locked in, hit that like button, subscribe and drop in the comments. Did George deserve what's coming? Because trust me, it's coming. Mia had seen Jae-won Han's photo exactly once, attached to a financial profile she'd pulled during her 3rd month of research. The profile was 8 pages. She'd read all of it. Han Capital. Net worth somewhere north of 4 billion, depending on the quarter. Offices in Seoul, Singapore, and Los Angeles. No scandal attached to his name, no litigation, no public feuds, which in the world she'd been studying meant either he was genuinely clean or he was very good at keeping things quiet. The drive Min-jun had given her contained his name twice. Not as a perpetrator, as a victim. Someone had been siphoning from a Han Capital subsidiary account for years, small enough amounts each time that it wouldn't trip automated flags, large enough in aggregate that it had added up to something in the 8-figure range. She hadn't gotten deep enough into that thread yet to understand the full shape of it. She'd been focused on Jiho Song and the money laundering structure first. Now she was standing in the elevator of Club Obsidian's parking structure, holding a card with Han's name on it, going up to level 3 to bring him his car. She almost didn't go. She stood in the elevator for a full beat after the doors opened on 3, her hand against the frame, running the logic. He'd watched what happened in that structure. He'd intervened. He knew she worked there. Those 3 things together meant he'd been paying attention to her specifically before tonight, and she needed to understand why before she got any further into a conversation with him. She brought him the car. He was standing at the elevator bank when she pulled up, his assistant, a young Korean man in a slim gray suit, beside him with a tablet, talking in a low voice about a morning meeting. Jae-won took the keys from Mia without looking at her directly, then handed them to his assistant and said something to him in Korean. The assistant nodded and got in the car. Jae-won turned to Mia. Walk with me. She didn't move. I don't think that's. I have footage, he said. Quiet. Conversational. Like he was mentioning the weather. Camera on the east wall of level 2. You and a man exchanging something near the stairwell door about 4 hours ago. The man is Min-jun Oh. He works for a subsidiary of a company that I own. The elevator doors behind her opened and closed on their own cycle. I'm not going to do anything with it, he continued, before she could speak. That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you so we don't waste each other's time pretending this is a simple situation. What do you want? The same thing you want. He said it without hesitation. Jiho Song and everyone connected to him, to be held accountable for what they've done. She looked at him for a long moment. The parking structure was almost empty now. Somewhere below them a car alarm chirped once and went quiet. How long have you known about me? She said. 3 weeks. And you waited. I wanted to see how far you'd get on your own. You got further than my investigators did in 6 months. He said it without flattery in it. Like a data point. The man tonight. Is he going to be a problem? That's not your concern. It becomes my concern if he compromises what I'm about to propose. He reached into his coat pocket again and produced a phone this time, unlocked it, and held it out to her. On the screen was a photograph. A building exterior, generic, could have been anywhere. That's the office space Jiho Song uses to process the transfers. It's registered to a shell company called Jinyu Holdings. I've had people trying to get inside that corporate structure for 4 months. They keep hitting the same wall. She looked at the photo, then at him. What's on the drive isn't enough to get you through that wall. Maybe not alone. But I have resources you don't. Legal cover, security, direct access to the Financial Crimes Division of the prosecutor's office through a contact I've maintained for years. He took the phone back. You have the evidence. I have the infrastructure. The question is whether you're willing to work inside a structure you don't control. That's a very honest way to pitch it. I don't have time for dishonesty. She laughed, not warmly, just the short, involuntary kind. You watched a man drag me across a parking garage, and your first instinct was to pitch me a business arrangement. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. Closer to acknowledgement. I intervened. After sitting in your car for 20 seconds. 15. He said it without blinking. I needed to assess the situation. She stared at him. He didn't look away. I'll think about it, she said. Think tonight. I need an answer by morning. He turned toward the stairwell. You shouldn't go back to your apartment. Not tonight. I don't remember asking for your opinion on that. He stopped. Turned halfway. The man who grabbed you, does he know where you live? She didn't answer. Then don't go home tonight. He pushed the stairwell door open. Think about the offer. He was gone before she could respond. Mia stood alone on level 3. The concrete smelled like exhaust and rain coming in through the open sides of the structure. She shifted her bag on her shoulder, felt the drive beneath her shirt. She called Journey. Journey picked up on the second ring. Already in the middle of something, background noise loud. And then Mia said, "Can I come over?" And Journey immediately went quiet. What happened? I'll tell you when I get there. Mia, I'm fine. I just need somewhere to sleep tonight. A beat. Get in a cab. I'm home. Journey's apartment was small and warm and smelled like the candles she burned obsessively, something cedar and something citrus that Mia had always found genuinely calming. Journey herself was sitting on her kitchen counter in an oversized sweatshirt when Mia arrived, and she stayed on that counter while Mia talked, which meant she was taking it seriously because Journey only stayed still when something had her full attention. Mia told her about Min-jun and the drive, about George showing up at the club, about what happened in the parking structure, about Jae-won-han. When she finished, Journey was quiet for a long moment. How bad was it? With George. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Mia set her bag on the kitchen table, pulled up her sleeve. The mark on her wrist had darkened into something more visible. Journey looked at it without saying anything. Then she got down from the counter and went to the freezer and came back with a small ice pack and handed it to her. You're not going back to that apartment, Journey said. I know. And you're not seriously considering working with this Han guy. I haven't decided. Journey tilted her head. Mia, he has things I don't have. And what I have, I can't finish alone. George showing up changes the timeline. She pressed the ice pack to her wrist. I was 3 weeks out. Now I don't know. You don't know this man. I know his financials. I know his company structure. I know he's been a victim of the same people I'm investigating. That doesn't mean he's safe. Nobody in this is safe. She said it without self-pity. Just a fact. But he came out of that car. He didn't have to. Journey looked at her for a long time. If something goes wrong, I'll call you first. Mia held up the card. I'm going to sleep on it. She slept on Journey's couch with the flash drive in her hand, her phone face down on the floor beside her, and George Reed's voice somewhere in the back of her head, patient and even. We're not done. At 5:47 in the morning, she picked up her phone and sent a text to the number on the back of Jae-won-han's card. I have conditions. His response came in under a minute. Of course you do. 8 a.m. Address to follow. This story is just getting started. Like this video if you want to see where it goes, and subscribe and tell me in the comments. Do you trust Jae-won? Or is he just a different kind of danger? Han Capital occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in Gangnam that Mia had walked past a dozen times without ever looking up. The lobby required a keycard and a phone call to get past the front desk. A man named Han Hyun-soo, Jae-won's assistant, slim, early 30s, the same one from the parking structure, met her at the elevator on the 38th floor and walked her through a space that was the cleanest office she'd ever been inside. No clutter. No personal items visible except for one wall near the far end that she noticed before Hyun-soo guided her away from it. Jae-won was at his desk, standing, not sitting, reading something on a tablet, still in the same suit from last night, which meant he either hadn't slept or had a closet full of identical ones. She guessed the latter. He set the tablet down when she walked in. You said conditions, he said. What are they? I control when and how the evidence is released. Not you, not your lawyers, not your contact in the prosecutor's office. Me. I decide the timing. Agreed. She'd expected pushback. The speed of his agreement made her slow down. The story goes to a journalist I select. Not anyone connected to your company or your interests. Agreed. If at any point I decide to walk, you don't follow me. You don't use what I've shared against me. Everything I give you stays with me if I leave. He considered this one for half a second longer. Agreed. Provided you give me 72 hours notice before walking. 48. Fine. She put her bag on the chair across from his desk. You move fast. Your conditions are reasonable. I don't negotiate reasonable things. He came around the desk. I need to see what's on the drive. You need to see part of what's on the drive. He stopped. Something in his expression shifted, not anger, something more like recalibration. There are sections you're keeping back. There are sections I'm not ready to share yet. She pulled out her laptop. I'll show you the financial transfer records, the shell company structure, and the Genu Holdings documentation. That's what you need to start building a case. He watched her set up. Then he pulled a chair around to her side of the desk and sat beside her, not hovering, just positioning himself to see the screen clearly. He smelled like whatever soap he'd used that morning and something faintly like cold air, like he'd been outside recently. She opened the first file. For the next 3 hours they worked. J1 was quiet in the way that meant he was processing rather than disengaged. He asked precise questions when he needed clarification, never more than one at a time, never asking something she'd already explained. She'd worked with enough people to know the difference between someone following along and someone who was actually ahead of her, extrapolating, connecting threads before she'd finished pulling them. He was ahead of her on the financial architecture. She was ahead of him on the human element, the names, the relationships, who owed what to whom. Around 11, Hyunsu brought them food without being asked. J1 didn't acknowledge it beyond moving his notepad to make room on the desk. Mia ate without stopping work. At some point she realized they'd been talking in an unbroken back and forth for over an hour without a single wasted sentence, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. Then he said, Genu Holdings. She looked at the screen. The name was there in the corporate registration documents she'd pulled from Minjun's files. What about it, she said. Genu. He said it again. Different this time. Quieter. Like he was testing the sound of it. That was my sister's name. Jenhan. Korean nickname. Our parents called her that. Mia kept her eyes on the screen. The holding company was registered 6 years ago, she said carefully. 6 years ago. He was looking at the registration date on the screen. She died 6 years ago. She didn't say anything. How long have you known this? He asked. I found the name connection 2 weeks into working with these documents. I didn't know enough about your family at that point to be sure it was significant. And now I think it's the most significant thing in the entire case. He stood up, walked to the window. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did, continuous, indifferent, enormous. He stood there for what felt like a long time. His reflection in the glass was as controlled as his face usually was, but something around the edges of it was different. Mia watched him. She didn't reach for something to say. Some things didn't have a thing to reach for. How did she die, she asked. Car accident. He said it flat. On a road she drove every week. In conditions she'd driven in 100 times. The investigation lasted 9 days and concluded with mechanical failure. He turned from the window. I never accepted that. Is that why you started looking into Song Ji-ho? It's why I started looking into everything. He came back to the desk. Saturday. Looked at the screen like it was something he could hold accountable. Someone named a criminal enterprise after my dead sister. I need to know why. We'll find out why. She said it plainly, not to comfort him, because she believed it. He looked at her. For the first time that morning, something in his face was entirely unguarded, and then the control came back up over it like a shade being drawn. But she'd seen it. Keep going, he said. Show me the rest. Meanwhile, across the city, George Reed was sitting in the parking lot of a coffee shop he'd never been to before, on the phone with a number he'd found through a contact of a contact, doing something he hadn't done since his mid-20s when he was still the kind of person who made decisions based on ego rather than strategy. He was making a deal with someone he didn't fully understand yet. Song Ji-ho's voice on the phone was smooth, older, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who'd learned to sound relaxed as a survival skill. You're telling me, Ji-ho said, that she's working with Han Jae-won. As of this morning. Yes. A pause. Not surprised. More like a man reconfiguring something in his mind. And the drive, Ji-ho said. Min Jun gave it to her directly. That's what I understand. What do you want from this, Mr. Reed? George kept his voice level. I want her out of whatever she's gotten herself into. That's all. Ji-ho was quiet for a moment. Of course. The smoothness in his voice didn't change. I'll be in touch. The line went dead. George sat with the phone in his hand. Outside the coffee shop window, people moved past on the sidewalk with their coffee cups and their normal mornings, and he watched them with the specific impatience of a man who has always believed the world should move faster to accommodate him. He'd made the call because he told himself it was about Mia, about getting her to come to her senses before she got herself hurt. He didn't look too closely at the other reasons. He never had. Back in Han Tower, the afternoon light had shifted across the office floor by the time Mia stretched her arms and leaned back in her chair and said, "We're not going to crack Genu Holdings from the outside. We need Min Jun to walk us through the internal transfer logs. Min Jun is a risk," Jae-won said. "If Song's people are monitoring him. They're not. Yet." She closed 2 files and opened a third. "But that window is closing. George knows I got the drive from someone. It won't take long for him to figure out who." Jae-won looked at her. "How much does he know about what you were doing at the club?" "Enough to cause problems if he talks to the right people." "Has he talked to the right people?" She met his eyes. I don't know. He picked up his phone, said 3 sentences to Hyun-soo in Korean, listened to the response, and set it down. We need to move faster than I planned, he said. I know. He looked at her across the desk, and she looked back at him, and there was a moment where the late afternoon light came through the glass at a certain angle and caught something in the space between them that neither of them acknowledged, and both of them registered. You should stay here tonight, he said. Guest suite on 36. It's more secure than wherever you've been. I stayed at a friend's. And tonight. She looked at the screen, at the files, at the name Jinyu Holdings sitting in plain text at the top of a corporate registration document, named after a girl who died on a road she drove every week. I'll stay, she said. One night. It was 3 more after that. That connection you just felt between them? That's just the beginning. Like this video, subscribe, and drop in the comments. What do you think Jiho's song is planning? Because that phone call is about to change everything. The guest suite on 36 was not what Mia expected. She'd imagined corporate neutral, beige walls, a bed that was technically comfortable, the kind of room that communicated hospitality as an afterthought. What she got was something that felt genuinely considered. A deep gray couch with actual throw blankets. Books on a shelf that weren't decorative, spines cracked, pages bent. A window that looked over the Han River, the lights across the water multiplying in the current. She stood at that window the first night for a long time. She was thinking about George, but not in the way she'd been thinking about him for the past 8 months. Not with the low-grade vigilance she'd gotten used to carrying, the checking of mirrors and scanning of rooms. She was thinking about the phone call she knew he was capable of making. She'd learned, slowly and at considerable cost, that George Reed's default response to losing control of a situation was to find someone with more power than him and offer them something useful. She'd seen him do it in business. She'd seen him do it personally. He'd done it to her once, gone around her to her thesis advisor with concerns about her mental state during a period when she'd been pulling away from him, which had resulted in a meeting she'd had to sit through with her teeth clenched while her advisor looked at her with careful eyes, all because George had decided that institutional pressure was a more efficient lever than conversation. She knew what he was. The question was who he'd talk to and how fast. She took a shower, borrowed a Han Capital branded sweatshirt from the closet, and sat cross-legged on the bed with her laptop, going deeper into the Jinyu Holdings registration chain. Around midnight, she found something she hadn't seen before, a secondary director listing, added 2 years after the initial registration, buried in an amendment filing. The name was Kim Dong-woo. She searched the name, cross-referenced it against the financial files from Min Jun's drive, cross-referenced it against the Han Capital corporate structure. She sat very still. Kim Dong-woo was listed in a Han Capital document from 8 years ago as a board-level financial advisor. He'd left the company 2 years later. The timing placed his departure roughly 4 months before Jin Han's death. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark room with the river lights moving outside and thought about what she'd just found and what it meant and whether she had any obligation to tell Jae-won tonight. She did not open his door. She set her alarm for 6 and lay down on top of the covers with her clothes on and stared at the ceiling until sleep came and got her around 2. In the morning, Jae-won was already in the office. She could see him through the glass wall when she came off the elevator at 7:30, standing at his desk, on a call, his back to the door. Hyun-soo intercepted her near the kitchen area and handed her coffee without making it a moment, which she appreciated. She waited. When Jae-won ended the call, he saw her through the glass and opened the office door. You found something, he said. She hadn't said anything yet. She was still holding the coffee cup. Your face, he said. Simply. She came in and set her laptop on the desk and turned it to face him and let him look at what she'd found. He read it. Read it again. Sat down. Kim Dong-woo. The name sitting there in 2 documents simultaneously, one at the bottom of a Jinyu Holdings amendment, one in a Han Capital personnel record from years before. He was on your board, Mia said. He was an advisor. My father brought him in. His voice was level, but his eyes were doing something different. He left quietly. I was told it was personal reasons. He left 4 months before your sister died. Jae-won looked at the screen. And 2 years later, he's a director of a company named after her. Yeah. He stood up and went to the window again. She was starting to understand that the window was where he went when he needed a surface to think against. My father knew Dong-woo well, he said. They came up together. Same business school. Same early circles. She didn't say what she was thinking yet. He said it for her. You think my father knows about Jinyu Holdings? I think it's possible that Kim Dong-woo didn't just leave. I think it's possible that he left to start something, and that someone at Han Capital knew about it. He turned from the window. His face was the most controlled she'd seen it, which meant the least of it was showing. Show me the amendment filing again. She turned the laptop back toward herself and pulled it up and turned it to him again. He sat down across from her and looked at it for a long time. She drank her coffee. Didn't push. There's more on the drive, he said finally. The section you held back. Yes. Is it about my father? She looked at him steadily. I don't know yet. I haven't fully processed that section. I held it back because I wasn't sure what I had. But you think it might be. I think it might be. She said it directly, because he'd asked directly. And I thought you deserved to know that before I went further into it. He looked at her. Not warmly. There was nothing warm about it. But it was the look of a man taking in information about someone and updating his understanding. Deciding something. Thank you, he said. She nodded. Keep going, he said. Into the section you held back. Everything. And when you know what it is, tell me. I will. He picked up his phone. Started making calls. She opened her laptop and went back to work. They stayed on opposite sides of the desk all day, and it didn't feel like distance. 3 floors down and across the city simultaneously, Minjun was having a bad day. He'd been having a bad 3 days, actually, ever since he'd handed Mia the drive and the parking structure. He'd been watching for signs, changed behavior from his supervisors, unexpected meetings, anyone paying unusual attention to his workstation. He'd been doing his job exactly as he always did it, arriving on time, leaving on time, keeping his expressions neutral and his conversations brief. On the 3rd day, his supervisor called him into an office for what was described as a quarterly review. Quarterly reviews didn't happen in November. Minjun sat across from a man he'd worked beside for 6 years and answered questions about his schedule and his workload and smiled at the right moments and left the office and went to the bathroom and locked the stall door and stood there with his hands against the cold metal for a long time. He sent Mia a message that evening. 2 sentences. They're asking questions. I think we have less time than you think. Mia got the message while sitting on the floor of the guest suite with files spread around her in a shape that made sense to her, if not to anyone else. She read it twice. Then she took the drive, plugged it into her laptop, and opened the section she'd been avoiding. She read for 2 hours. When she was done, she sat very still in the middle of her organized chaos and thought about what she owed Jae-won and what it was going to cost him to hear it. Then she stood up, went down the hall, and knocked on his office door. He was still there. It was past 10. He opened the door and looked at her and read her face again. He was very good at reading her face, which was something she hadn't decided how she felt about yet. Sit down, she said. He sat. She sat across from him. The section of the drive I held back, she said. It's financial records from inside Han Capital. Not recent ones. From 6 years ago. He waited. Your father authorized a series of payments to Kim Dong-woo in the months leading up to your sister's death. The payment structure doesn't match any vendor or consultant contract in the official records. She kept her voice level. Not cold, not soft. Just clear. I can't tell you definitively what those payments were for. But they exist. And they stopped the month after Jen died. Jae-won sat across from her and didn't say anything for a long time. The office was quiet. The city outside the glass was doing its continuous thing, indifferent. How certain are you? He said finally. The documents are from Minjun's files. He got them from inside the company's archive system. The metadata is clean. She paused. I'm certain enough that I'm telling you. He leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling, came back down. My father is 71, he said. He lives 40 minutes outside the city. He calls me every Sunday. She didn't say anything. He was destroyed by her death. His voice didn't change, but something in the rhythm of his words shifted. I watched it happen. He aged 10 years and 6 months. Guilt does that, Mia said quietly. Jae-won looked at her. She held his gaze. She wasn't going to soften it. He hadn't asked her to. He stood up. I need tonight. Of course. We keep working in the morning. Okay. He walked to the door and held it open for her. She gathered her laptop and went out. At the door she stopped. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. He said it without heat. You told me the truth. That's what I asked for. She went back down the hall to the guest suite. Behind the closed office door, Jae-won Han sat alone in a very expensive room and stayed there until the city outside went from dark to gray to the first pale edge of a new morning. This just got a lot more complicated. Like this video if you felt that. Subscribe and comment. Did his father know what happened to Jen? What do you think? The next morning arrived gray and cold, rain coming in off the river in a flat, steady drizzle that made the city look like a photograph of itself. Mia was at the workstation by 7. Jae-won came in at 7:15 with no indication of what the night had cost him except that he looked like a man who had paid something significant and decided it was worth it. He sat down, opened his laptop. I called my contact in the prosecutor's office last night, he said. Lee Sang-hyun. He's been waiting for something concrete enough to move on. I think we're close. We need Minjun first. She turned her screen toward him. He's in the building. They're watching him. We need to get him out of there with the internal transfer logs before they figure out what he took. If we pull him out, Song knows we're moving. If we leave him in, Song gets to him first, and we lose the one person who can walk a prosecutor through the financial architecture from the inside. She looked at him. We have to move. He thought about it for 3 seconds. How do we get him out? He has a standing lunch break at 12:30. He goes to the same noodle place 2 blocks from his office every Tuesday. Today is Tuesday. She pulled up a map on her screen. If someone meets him there, Not me, someone he doesn't know, and walks him to a car. He disappears into the crowd and his office thinks he went to lunch. Jae-won looked at the map. Hyun-soo can do it. Does Hyun-soo know how to handle someone who might panic? Hyun-soo handles me. He can handle anyone. He stood up. I'll brief him. The extraction, such as it was, went almost cleanly. Hyun-soo met Min-jun at the noodle place at 12:40, slid into the seat across from him, and said Mia's name quietly. Min-jun's chopsticks went still. Hyun-soo said 3 more sentences. Min-jun looked at the door, looked at Hyun-soo, looked at the door again, and then set his chopsticks down and stood up. They were in the car by 12:52. Min-jun arrived at Han Tower, looking like a man who had crossed a border he couldn't uncross. He was 51, thick through the shoulders, hair going gray at the temples, and he had the specific exhaustion of someone who had been afraid for a long time and had finally decided that the fear was going to cost more than the alternative. He sat across from Mia and Jae-won in a conference room on 38 and looked at his hands on the table for a moment before he started talking. He talked for 2 hours. The internal transfer logs were worse than Mia had projected. Song Ji-ho had been using the shell company structure for 11 years, not 6, 11, moving money from a network of businesses that existed on paper through Jinyu Holdings into clean accounts in Singapore and one in the Cayman Islands. The amounts in the final 3 years had grown significantly because they'd gotten confident. Sloppy. The kind of sloppy that happens when you've been operating long enough to believe you've become invisible. Kim Dong-woo, Jae-won said at one point. Not a question. More like testing the name against what Min-jun was saying. Min-jun nodded. He manages the Singapore account. Has since the beginning. Who authorized the company name? Mia said. Jinyu. Who chose it? Min-jun looked at Jae-won. Something uncomfortable moved across his face. I don't know for certain. But the registration paperwork was filed by a law firm that Song Ji-ho has used for 20 years. He paused. But the name itself, the instruction to use that name, came in a handwritten note attached to the filing brief. I saw a copy once, by accident. It wasn't Song's handwriting. The room was quiet. Did you recognize the handwriting? Mia asked. No. He looked at the table. But the note said, and I remember this specifically because it seemed strange at the time. It said, she deserves to be remembered for something real. Jae-won sat back in his chair. Mia looked at him. He was looking at the middle distance, the place people look when something has landed and they're still feeling the shape of it. She deserves to be remembered for something real. Someone who had known Jin Han. Someone who had believed, or told themselves they believed, that naming a criminal enterprise after her was a form of memorial. The psychology of it was so distorted that it almost circled back around to sincere, which made it worse. Your father, Mia said quietly. Jae-won didn't deny it. After Min-jun was taken to a safe location that Hyun-soo had arranged, a property Jae-won kept outside the city, bland enough to be invisible, Mia and Jae-won were alone in the conference room with the files spread between them and the rain still doing its flat gray work outside the windows. I have to call him, Jae-won said. Not yet. She said it quickly but not harshly. If you call him now, and he knows we're close, he could reach out to Song. Even unintentionally. My father wouldn't. You didn't think he knew about Dong-woo either. She said it directly. Not unkindly. Wait until we have everything locked. Lee Sang-hyun has the documents. We give him the transfer logs today. He can move on Song Ji-ho within 48 hours. After that, your father can't do anything that changes the outcome. He looked at her. She could see him weighing it. She understood what she was asking. She was asking him to hold something devastating at arm's length for 2 more days, which was a different kind of hard than not knowing. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours. He nodded. Once. Final. She reached across the conference table and picked up her pen and went back to organizing the documents for the prosecutor's office. He watched her for a moment and then did the same, and they worked side by side through the afternoon while the rain came down outside and the city moved below them, indifferent as ever. At some point Hyun-soo brought food again. At some point the light shifted from afternoon to evening. At some point Jae-won said something about a specific transaction date and Mia responded, and their exchange kept going, sharp and fast and uninterrupted, and at the end of it Jae-won said, "You're very good at this," and Mia said, "So are you." And neither of them said anything after that for a few seconds. Then Jae-won's phone lit up. He looked at it. His face did something she hadn't seen before. Not alarm exactly. Controlled alarm, if that was a thing. "It's Song Ji-ho's private number," he said. She put her pen down. He answered. "Put it on speaker." Ji-ho's voice was exactly what she'd imagined from his photograph. Smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who had learned that sounding calm was the most effective form of aggression. "Jae-won," he said, like they were old friends. "I think we need to talk. Just the two of us." "About what?" Jae-won said. "About the fact that you have Min-jun-oh in a building outside the city." A pause. "And the fact that the woman he's been working with has been sitting in your office for 4 days. The rain outside. The city below. And I think," Ji-ho continued, that before this goes somewhere neither of us intended, you and I should have a conversation about what really happened to your sister. Jaewon's hand on the table was perfectly still. Tomorrow morning, he said. Send me an address. I'll do that. The smoothness again. Come alone. The line ended. Mia looked at Jaewon. You're not going alone, she said. I know. He picked up his phone. I need to call Lee Sang-hyun tonight. Jiho Song just made his move. Like this video if you're locked in, and subscribe. Comment. Is Jiho trying to negotiate, or is this a trap? Because Jaewon is about to find out. Lee Sang-hyun arrived at Han Tower at 9 that evening. He was 60, compact, wore glasses on a chain around his neck, and carried a battered leather briefcase that he'd apparently been using since law school based on its condition. He looked like someone's grandfather and moved like someone who had won a lot of fights that other people hadn't seen coming. He reviewed the documents Mia and Jaewon laid out for him at the conference table over 2 hours, asking questions in a voice so quiet she sometimes had to lean forward to hear him. He didn't react visibly to anything, not the transfer logs, not Minjun's testimony summary, not Kim Dongwoo's name, not the Jinyu Holdings registration documents. When he was done, he folded his glasses back around his neck and looked at Jaewon. If we move, he said, we move on all of them at once. Song Ji-ho, Dongwoo, the shell company directors. Any sequenced arrests give the others time to move assets or disappear. How long do you need to prepare? Jaewon said. 48 hours. Maybe 36 if I push. He looked at Mia. The journalist you have in mind. They need to be ready to publish within 4 hours of the arrests. That's the window before legal teams start suppressing. She's ready, Mia said. She'd been in contact with the journalist, Haon Park, at a major investigative outlet, for 2 weeks, keeping her updated in carefully encrypted messages without yet giving her everything she needed. Haon had been patient and precise and hadn't pushed, which was why Mia had chosen her. Song called me tonight, Jaewon said. He wants to meet tomorrow morning. Lee Sang-hyun looked at him over the table. He's fishing. He knows something is moving, but he doesn't know how far along you are. He picked up his briefcase. Don't go. If I don't go, he knows. If you go, there's a version of this where you walk into something I can't help you walk out of. He stood. You're not a prosecutor, Jaewon. You're not equipped for what Song Ji-ho does in rooms without witnesses. Jaewon said nothing. Lee Sang-hyun looked at Mia. Talk sense into him. He left. Mia and Jaewon were alone in the conference room again. It was past 11. The building was quiet around them, the kind of quiet that large buildings get at night when the people have left and only the structure remains. He's right, Mia said. I know he's right. But you're going anyway. He looked at her. He said he has information about Jin. Whatever else Jiho Song is, he was connected to her death. I need to hear what he knows. She understood that. She didn't like it, and she understood it. Then I'm going with you. He said you should come alone. He didn't say anything to you. He doesn't know I exist beyond being the woman Minjun worked with. She leaned forward on the table. I'll be outside. In a car. With my phone recording everything through the window if I can get close enough, or a separate device if I can't. She looked at him steadily. You don't go into a room like that without someone who knows where you are. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, you've done this kind of thing before. Not exactly this kind of thing, but close enough. A pause. Okay. She started gathering her files. Get some sleep. You too. She paused at the door. In the conference room glass, she could see his reflection, still sitting at the table, looking at a document she'd already moved past. She'd learned, over 4 days in close proximity, that Jaewon Han processed things slowly in the sense that he processed them completely. He didn't move to the next thing until he'd finished with the current thing in every dimension. She imagined that was lonely sometimes. She knew what it was like to think more carefully than the people around you wanted you to. She went down the hall. She didn't sleep much. Song Ji-ho's address was a private dining room in a restaurant in Itaewon that opened at 8 in the morning for private bookings and not until noon for the public. The building's exterior was deliberately unremarkable, the kind of place where nothing that happened inside could be verified by anyone who wasn't invited. Mia drove a rental car she'd booked under Journey's name and parked across the street from the side entrance at 7:45. She had a directional microphone she'd borrowed from someone she'd once interviewed for a story on corporate surveillance. Not entirely legal, definitely not admissible, but enough to give her what she needed. Jaewon arrived at 8 exactly. He walked in without looking across the street. They'd agreed to no acknowledgement. She watched the door close behind him. Inside, based on what Jaewon described to her afterward, Jiho Song was sitting at a small round table with tea already poured. He was 70, maybe 72, with the careful elegance of a man who had spent his entire life learning how to make wealth look effortless. He stood when Jaewon entered, as if this were a normal meeting, as if the two of them got together for tea routinely. He gestured to the chair across from him. Jaewon sat. Thank you for coming, Jiho said. You said you had information about my sister. Jiho poured tea into Jaewon's cup. Set the pot down carefully. I said I could tell you what really happened. That's a different thing. Tell me. Jiho looked at him with the specific regard of a man who has held a secret for a long time and finds that it has become its own kind of burden. Your sister didn't die in an accident. The room, the tea, the unremarkable building around them. She found something, Jiho continued. In your father's financial records. She was 24. She was curious. She was smart. She was asking questions she didn't understand were dangerous. He looked at the table. Dongwoo went to your father. Your father, God help him, told Dongwoo to handle it. He thought, I want you to understand this. He believed Dongwoo would frighten her, pay her off, convince her she'd misunderstood. But Dongwoo made a different decision. Jiho looked up. Your father didn't know what Dongwoo had done until afterward. And by then, he opened his hands. A gesture of completion, of things being impossible to undo. Jae-won sat across from him, very still. You've known this for 6 years, he said. Yes. And you said nothing. I was protecting myself. Jiho said it without apparent shame. Simply, the way old men sometimes tell the truth, past the point where it costs them anything to admit it. I had already built too much on the same foundation. If Dongwoo fell, I fell. If your father fell, he paused. I told myself the money going through Jinyu Holdings was separate from what happened to your sister. It took me a long time to understand that there's no such thing as separate. Mia, in the car across the street, had the microphone aimed at the building's side ventilation panel, which was as close as she could get. She was getting fragments. Enough. She was recording everything. Inside, Jae-won looked at the man across from him who had kept his sister's death quiet for 6 years and built a criminal enterprise over her name, and was now sitting here with his carefully poured tea, explaining himself with the calm of a man making a final accounting. What do you want from this meeting? Jae-won said. I want to tell you the truth before someone else does. Jiho looked at him. And I want you to know that Kim Dongwoo acted without your father's knowledge or consent. Whatever else Han Jae-jun did. And he did things I won't excuse. He did not intend for your sister to die. Jae-won was quiet. That may not mean anything to you, Jiho said. Not much. Jae-won stood. But some. He left the building at 8:22. He crossed the street and got into the passenger seat of Mia's rental car and closed the door and sat there for a moment. She didn't say anything. Just started the car. 2 blocks away, at a red light, he said, Dongwoo. I got most of it, she said. The recording isn't perfect. It doesn't need to be. We have everything else. He looked out the window. Dongwoo killed her. I know. Song knew. I know. He looked at the light as it changed. My father knew afterward. She pulled the car forward. Yeah. The city moved around them. Can Lee Sang-hyun add Dongwoo to the arrest list? He said. I already texted him from the car while you were inside, she said. He said yes. Jae-won looked at her. She kept her eyes on the road. Thank you, he said. She drove. This is the part where everything shifts. Like this video and subscribe. Drop in the comments what you think Jae-won is going to do about his father. Because that conversation is still coming. 31 hours. That's what Lee Sang-hyun needed in the end. He called Jae-won at 7:15 the following morning with 2 words. We're ready. Mia was already at her workstation when the call came. She heard Jae-won's side of it from across the office. When he hung up, he looked at her and said, Tonight. And she nodded and picked up her phone to call Haun Park. Haun answered on the first ring. She always answered on the first ring, which was one of the things Mia respected about her. Tonight, Mia said. A pause. How many? Song Ji-ho, Kim Dongwoo, 3 shell company directors. Simultaneous. Window. 4 hours from the first arrest. Maybe less. I'll be ready. Haun paused again. Are you safe? Working on it. She hung up. Jae-won was looking at her from his side of the desk. You should call your friend, he said. The woman you were staying with. Make sure she's somewhere safe tonight. Mia had already thought of that. George, she said. If he's been working with Song and Song gets taken tonight, George will have no one left to back him up. She picked up her phone. He'll come for me directly. Not if we've already handled it. She looked at him. What does that mean? Jae-won opened his laptop. I had Hyunsu run a background on George Reed 3 days ago. The car in the parking structure. It's registered to a holding company. The holding company has a financial relationship with a company that Song Ji-ho controls. He turned the laptop toward her. George didn't just show up at the club that night. She looked at the screen. The corporate chain. The names. He was already connected to Song, she said. Loosely. Before that night. After he saw you with me. He made it formal. Jae-won closed the laptop. He took money from Song in exchange for information about your investigation. The room was quiet. She'd known George was capable of a lot of things. She'd cataloged most of them over the years of loving him and the year of leaving him. But there was still something specifically cold about seeing it laid out in corporate structure form. A man who'd told her he loved her, trading her safety for access to someone else's power. Okay, she said, quietly. Then she looked up. How do we handle it? Hyunsu has been in contact with Lee Sang-hyun's office. George's financial connection to Song is thin, but documentable. It's enough. He met her eyes. He gets picked up with the others. She nodded. She turned back to her screen and kept working. Her face was completely still. The hours between morning and evening had a particular quality to them that Mia would think about later. Not slow exactly, but dense, each hour carrying more weight than the last. She and Jae-won worked through them methodically, finalizing the document package for Hoon, confirming Min-jun's protected status, verifying the chain of evidence that Lee Sang-hyun's office needed to be airtight. Around 4 in the afternoon, in a gap between tasks, Jae-won said, "I called my father this morning." She looked up. Before the arrests. I needed him to hear it from me. He was looking at a document on his screen, but not reading it. He didn't deny anything. He cried. He's 71 years old, and he cried on the phone, and I didn't know what to do with that. She waited. Lee Sang-hyun says his exposure is limited. He covered up the payments to Dong-woo, but he didn't participate in the broader criminal enterprise, and there's no direct evidence he knew what Dong-woo intended. He paused. The prosecutors will decide what to do with him. And you? She said. I don't know yet. He looked at her. There's a version of this where I understand that a man can make a terrible decision out of fear and spend the rest of his life carrying it. There's another version where I never speak to him again. He was quiet for a moment. Right now I'm somewhere in between. That's a reasonable place to be, she said. Is it? Yeah. She looked back at her screen. Most true things are somewhere in between. He watched her for a moment. Then he went back to work. At 5:30 Hyun-soo came in with a quiet knock and said something to Jae-won in Korean, and Jae-won said something back and then looked at Mia. They're moving in 3 hours, he said. She saved everything she was working on. Sent the final document package to Hoon. Encrypted the backup. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked across the desk at Jae-won Han, who was closing his laptop with the deliberate care of a man finishing something that had been a long time coming. After tonight, she said. What do you do? He looked at her. What do you mean? With the company. With your father. With the Jinyu Holdings name. That just gets dissolved. Like it was never there. She looked at her hands. Her name just disappears again. He was quiet for a long moment. I've been thinking about that. He looked out at the city through the glass. There's a foundation I've been meaning to start for 3 years. I keep finding reasons to delay it. A pause. I think I'll name it after her. Mia looked at him. He was still looking at the city. Something real, she said. He turned. Met her eyes. Something real, he said. At 8:47 that evening, Lee Sang-hyun's office moved. Song Ji-ho was taken at his residence. Kim Dong-woo was apprehended at Incheon Airport with a bag packed, which suggested he'd been more prepared for this moment than Song had been. The 3 shell company directors were picked up in 2 separate locations without incident. George Reed was arrested in a hotel lobby in Gangnam at 9:03, which was where he'd been staying since the night in the parking structure. He was on his phone when they came for him. The account Hyun-soo had built connecting his financial relationship with Song's organization was apparently thin enough that his lawyer would eventually get it reduced, but enough to put him in a room with serious questions for a very long time. Mia was sitting in Jae-won's office when Hyun-soo got the confirmation calls. Each one came a few minutes apart. Hyun-soo read them off in a steady, quiet voice. After the last one, the room was still for a moment. Then Mia called Hoon. It's done, she said. All of them. Start the clock. She heard Hoon's exhale. Then the sound of keyboards. Hoon Park's story went live at 11:58 that night. By morning it had been picked up by every major outlet in Korea and several internationally. The story named Song Ji-ho, Kim Dong-woo, the shell company structure, the 11-year timeline, the money, the accounts in Singapore and the Caymans. It named Jinyu Holdings and explained what the name meant and who Jin Han had been and how she had died. It named Mia Carter as the researcher who had spent 7 months building the case from inside a parking valet job. It did not name Jae-won Han as a source. Per their agreement, Mia read the article on her laptop at Jae-won's conference table at 6 in the morning, while Jae-won stood at the window watching the city receive the morning. Her phone had been buzzing since midnight. Journey had sent 11 messages, the last of which was just a string of characters that communicated everything. She put the phone face down. It's everything you wanted, Jae-won said from the window. It's everything I started with. She closed the laptop. It turned into something bigger. He turned from the window. He looked at her across the conference table, the files still spread between them, the coffee cups from last night, the particular mess of 2 people who had been working a problem together for days. You have the offer from New York, he said. She nodded. When do you have to decide? I already decided. She stood. I'm taking it. Something moved across his face. He didn't try to stop it. When do you leave? He said. 2 weeks. He nodded, looked at the table, came around it toward her, not fast, not slow, and stopped about 2 feet away, the same distance he'd stood from her in the parking structure that first night, which she didn't think was deliberate, but noticed anyway. You're very good at this, he said. The same words he'd said days ago, in the late afternoon light. You said that already. I know. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket, produced a card, plain, white, the same design as the first one he'd given her. He held it out. She looked at it, then at him. On the back, in his handwriting, a number, and 2 words. Call me. She took it. She put it in her jacket pocket. I'll think about it, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that would become one, eventually. Okay, he said. Like this video if you've come this far, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Is she going to call him? Because what happens next will tell you everything about who Mia Carter really is. 2 weeks is enough time for a city to feel like a chapter. Mia spent the first week handling the aftermath. Meetings with Lee Sang-hyun's office for her formal statement. Calls with Hoon to navigate the follow-up coverage. Conversations with her thesis advisor about the academic paper she was already drafting from the data. Her apartment was safe to go back to now. She went back, stood in the middle of it for a moment, then opened the windows and started packing boxes. George's legal situation was unresolved and would stay that way for a while. His lawyer had already started working on reducing his exposure. She heard this through Hyun-soo, which meant Jae-won had people watching the case, which she understood and didn't ask him about. She thought about George less than she expected to, not because what he'd done didn't matter, but because it had stopped being the loudest thing. When you spend enough time looking at a criminal enterprise that stretches across a decade and crosses the line into a young woman's death, one man's obsession starts to look like the smaller thing it always was. She didn't feel sorry for him. She didn't feel satisfaction either. She felt finished, which was different from both. Hoon called on the 4th day after publication. The story had been nominated for something significant already. She said it without ego, just as information. She asked if Mia had thought about what came next. New York, Mia said. With the firm? With the firm. Good. Hoon paused. You should know, they've been reading your work for a while. This wasn't a reactive hire. They were coming for you regardless. Mia sat with that for a moment. I didn't know that. Most people don't know when they've already arrived. Hoon said it lightly. Good luck, Mia. She packed another box. She saw Jae-won once in the 2nd week. She hadn't planned it. She'd gone to Han Tower to drop off a final signed document for Hyun-soo, something the prosecutor's office needed from her that had been sitting in her bag for 3 days. And Hyun-soo met her at the elevator on 38, and they were in the middle of the handoff when Jae-won's office door opened. He stopped when he saw her. Just for a half second. Mia, he said. I was just dropping something off. She held up the envelope, already handed over to Hyun-soo. I'm not staying. He nodded. He had his coat on. He was heading somewhere, or coming back from somewhere. He looked the way he'd looked the day they met. Controlled, composed, the lines of his face carrying nothing visible unless you'd learned where to look. She'd learned where to look. How's the packing, he said. Almost done. Do you need anything? No. He nodded again. Put his hands in his coat pockets. Hyun-soo found something important to look at on his tablet. The foundation filing went through, Jae-won said. Officially registered this morning. Jenhan Foundation. It'll focus on investigative journalism support, funding researchers and journalists working on public interest cases. She looked at him. Something real, he said. She felt something move in her chest that she chose not to examine too closely in a corporate hallway. That's good, she said. That's really good. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stepped back toward the elevator with her as the doors opened. They rode down 11 floors together in a silence that was the most comfortable silence she'd been inside in as long as she could remember, which told her something she was going to have to deal with eventually. In the lobby, he held the door. She walked through it, stopped on the other side, turned. I have the card, she said. I know. I haven't decided yet. I know that too. He said it without pressure, like a man who had genuinely made peace with uncertainty, which she suspected was new for him. She looked at him standing in the glass doorway of his building, the city going past behind her. I'll let you know, she said. Whenever you're ready, he said. She turned and walked down the street. She didn't look back. She was going to look at the card approximately 40 more times on the plane. She already knew this. She was going to sit in the window seat over the Pacific and pull it out and read the number and the 2 words as if they were going to tell her something new. And every time they were going to say the same thing they'd said from the beginning. Call me. The night before her flight, Journey came over with food and wine and sat on the floor among the boxes and said, Are you actually going to be okay? Yes, Mia said, and meant it. The George thing is handled. The Jae-won thing. Mia poured the wine. Is complicated. Mia. What? Journey looked at her with the specific look of a woman who has known someone long enough to be exhausted by their self-protection and fond of it simultaneously. Call him. I haven't decided. Yes, you have. Journey picked up her glass. You've decided and you're waiting for some reason that sounds good in your head, but probably isn't. Mia drank her wine. He lives here, and I'm going to New York. Planes exist. It's complicated. Everything real is complicated. Journey gestured at Mia with her glass. That's not a reason. That's a description. They ate. They talked about other things. Journey's job. A gallery opening she'd been invited to. the absolutely unhinged content of a show they'd both been watching. They stayed on the floor among the boxes until past midnight, and then Journey hugged her at the door for a long time, without saying anything, and then she was gone. The apartment was quiet. Most of it was in boxes. The window was still open, the last of the autumn air coming in off the city. Mia stood in the empty living room. She reached into her jacket pocket. The card was there. Plain white. J1's number on one side. The same 2 words on the back. She looked at it for a while. Then she set it on the kitchen counter. Not in the box. On the counter. Where she'd see it in the morning when she finished closing everything up. She saw it in the morning. She was running behind. She always ran behind when she was trying to be on time. And she was dragging her last box to the door, and she stopped in the kitchen to make sure she hadn't left anything, and the card was on the counter where she'd put it. She picked it up. She stood in her mostly empty kitchen in her coat with her bag over her shoulder and her flight leaving in 4 hours, and she looked at the card. She opened her phone. She typed the number. She didn't call. She opened a message thread instead, because she was Mia Carter and she was never going to do anything completely on someone else's terms, even when she wanted to. She typed, "Foundation is a good name. She deserved something real." She sent it. She picked up her last box. She was almost to the door when her phone moved in her hand. She stopped. She looked at the screen. His response was 3 words. "She had you." She stood in the doorway of her empty apartment with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder and the morning light coming in through the open window, and she held the phone in her hand and stood very still. Then she smiled. Small. Private. The kind that belongs entirely to yourself. She walked out. She pulled the door closed behind her. Somewhere across the city, in a glass office above the Han River, a man in a dark coat sat at his desk and looked at his phone and then set it down and looked out his window at the city he'd been watching for years, and for the first time in a very long time. The view looked like something other than a reminder of what he'd lost. She smiled. He said 3 words, "And nothing will ever be the same." If this story moved you, if you felt every single moment of it, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you're here when we do this again, because there are more stories where this came from. And drop one thing in the comments. What were those 3 words worth to you? Because to me, that's the whole story in one line. Thank you for watching.